One of my favorite quotes about Theodore Roosevelt was from his good friend William Hard, who said that TR was the prism through which the light of day took on more colors than could be seen in anybody else's company. And to me, that's just brilliant, and it just summarizes TR, and it also, I think, characterizes the appeal of Theodore Roosevelt for everybody, regardless of where you come from, your ethnicity, your cultural background. You can find some touch point with Theodore Roosevelt that is appealing, and not only appealing, but draws you in. Theodore Roosevelt had that power living, and he has that power now 100 years after his death. The TRA matters today because Theodore Roosevelt matters today.
Hello and welcome to the Talk About Teddy podcast, conversations exploring the world of Theodore Roosevelt. I'm your host, Kurt Skinner, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Larry Marple. And today we had a really terrific conversation with our friend Gregory Wynn, who currently serves as president and chairman of the Theodore Roosevelt Association. It's an organization that he first joined in 1984. Greg's a native of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and served for 24 years as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. He earned a B.A. in history from Millersville University of Pennsylvania, a Master's of Military Studies from the U.S. Marine Corps Command and Staff College, and an M.A. in Museum Studies from Johns Hopkins University. He is a true Theodore Roosevelt scholar and a collector of Roosevelt material focused on TR's writings. He resides now in Maryland and is a speechwriter and advisor at U.S. Cyber Command. All right, Greg Wynn, welcome to the Talk About Teddy podcast.
Thanks, gents. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be an episode on this great podcast that all of my best friends have participated in. Everybody from Mike Cullinane to Ed O'Keefe to Sue Sarna, and the list goes on. It's been great. I really enjoy listening to them. And Dwayne Junk, the great piece on the birds.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Dwayne was a lot of fun.
It was.
Trying to edit in all those bird sounds.
Well, my dog kept barking at them, too, when I was playing the podcast, because I typically play the podcast when I'm cooking dinner or something or cleaning the house, right? And I've got it on a Bluetooth speaker, and the birds are chirping away, and the dog started barking, and yeah.
Well, now we know we have pets listening to us, too, so that's good.
That's right, yeah.
Target audience. Okay. So, Greg, in 2023... you were elected as the 19th president of the Theodore Roosevelt Association. Now, we've made a lot of references to this group in previous podcasts, but we thought you would be the perfect person to actually be able to describe the background and the mission of the Theodore Roosevelt Association today.
Well, again, thanks for having me, and I welcome this opportunity because it's an opportunity to kind of get some of our initiatives currently out in front of folks and share some of the purpose and the history behind the organization. The TRA is an organization that I discovered when I was 12 years old. 1984, I think I joined, and my membership has continued since then. I don't know if you could add up the years, but it scares me to do that anymore. But as a young kid in rural Pennsylvania that did a fourth grade book report on Theodore Roosevelt, and that's when TR sunk his fangs into me. And to discover that an organization like the TRA existed, there are other people like me out there, right? Was a pretty astonishing thing for me. And, I struck up a writing correspondence with John Gable, who was the executive director, and developed a very close friendship with him. And, here I am now from 1984 to 2025, and I'm the chairman leading the organization in an organization with many other terrific leaders within it, too. So I've got a great bench with the TRA, and I've got a lot of personal history with it. So, the TRA was chartered by Congress in 1920. When you do the heat map of all of the TR-related entities out there, right? I mean, it's something that I think we would have fun doing at some point if we could get somebody willing to spend the time on it. a graphic artist is to sort of map out all the Roosevelt entities that are out there. Bullock Hall, the birthplace, Sagamore. There's a place in Portsmouth that deals with the Russo-Japanese War. There are some smaller, Pine Knot, right? Medora, the TR Presidential Library. The list goes on and on. The Theodore Roosevelt Association predates them all. We're now in our second century as a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and chartered by Congress. So we're the old lion on the block. And I think that we add value by potentially being the organization that can be the connective tissue with all of those different entities, developing partnerships, enhancing communications, encouraging joint events, and fostering scholarship and education, because the TRA doesn't sell anything. We don't we don't own anything. We're not a museum. We're not a library. We built the library that is at Harvard, and we gifted that to them in 1942. And, a little bit to our history, we secured various sites that now belong to the National Park Service or private entities that are, foundational for the study of Theodore Roosevelt and understanding TR. Sagamore Hill, the birthplace, Pine Knot were all TRA projects that were then turned over to the nation or the locales in some way, shape, or form. Our congressional charter, which we take very seriously, is to perpetuate the legacy and ideals of Theodore Roosevelt. And I think what that boils down to fundamentally is fostering scholarship, education, and discussion about Theodore Roosevelt and his times. And we do that in a variety of different ways that I'm sure we'll get into. But the other thing that's interesting about the TRA with our genesis is we were, in 1920, the Women's Roosevelt Memorial Association, and then the Roosevelt Memorial Association. The Women's Roosevelt Memorial Association were women. So we were essentially an organization that, our genesis is, the founding is with women. Many of those, TR sisters were involved. Edith was involved. And then the Roosevelt Memorial Association was also in parallel, more or less simultaneously stood up for the men, right? And they continued on very close parallel paths until the 1950s when they merged and became the Theodore Roosevelt Association, which is what we are today. But that's kind of an interesting history. The Women's Roosevelt Memorial Association secured the birthplace, for example, and also began the library, which was eventually gifted to Harvard, like I mentioned, in 1942.
Mm-hmm. We know some of TR's descendants are active in preserving his legacy. Can you tell us a little bit about the involvement of present-day Roosevelt family members?
Like I said, right from the very beginning with the Roosevelt Memorial Association, the Roosevelt family has been very active with the organization then and now in various roles. Leadership, we have a Roosevelt that's one of our two vice presidents. We've got Roosevelts on our executive committee. Very sad that we just recently lost Elizabeth Roosevelt, who had been an active member of the TRA leadership for decades, and she'll be sorely missed. Wonderful woman. And in other capacities, we've got Roosevelts that act as counsel, right? So sounding boards that allow us to ensure that we are keeping Roosevelt family in the dialogue as we mature and grow the organization, because I think that's important, not because the Roosevelts are Roosevelts, but I believe that they have a genuine interest in ensuring that the legacy is not only effectively carried forward, but also done so in a serious and honest way. And I think the Theodore Roosevelt Association brings a lot to the table in that regard. So, I would say that they're involved directly through leadership, they're involved directly through membership, and they're involved directly through council and as sounding boards. They've got a genuine interest in ensuring that the Roosevelt legacy is also, like I said, perpetuated in a manner that in today's day and age with misinformation and disinformation. I think that when you are a scholarly organization, you can lend yourself to that dialogue in a way that can contribute a lot.
So, what does your role as the president of the TRA involve?
So the chairman and president is the chairman of the board, right? Our executive committee, which is composed of, I think now 11 members, which is a very good size for a board. And I think that consistently we'd like to get to where we need to be somewhere between 9 and 11, which I think is optimum for a nonprofit board. But, so I'm chairman of the board. And with that team of folks, and they're all terrific, we sort of chart the course and manage programs, the fiscal side of the house, and essentially shaping what the TRA should be and needs to be is what I do. The one thing I will mention to you is we're currently in the process of hiring an executive director. So we currently have a CEO. We've decided to eliminate the position of the CEO and revert back to an executive director position, which is what we had for many years. And we just completed our strategic plan about 2 years ago. So what do we need to do to shape ourselves to be vital and to demonstrate value in our next century of existence? It's no small thing for a nonprofit, particularly a pretty niche nonprofit, the Theodore Roosevelt Association, right, to survive for a century. So that tells you how significant this organization is. And, it lends credibility to our history that we survived for a century now. But now with the shifting of any number of different things from technology to cultural norms to, how Theodore Roosevelt is viewed, I think the Theodore Roosevelt Association needs to look into the next century and look forward to ensure that the 12-year-old Greg Wynn 20 years from now has got a Theodore Roosevelt Association to join. But what is that going to look like, right? So we're hiring an executive director that will help us implement our strategic plan and move us forward into the next century. I think once we get our executive director on board that can execute our day-to-day operations and also implement that strategic plan, I think that my role and the board's role is to look strategically at the long-range goals and objectives, right? The executive director is going to implement the plan, manage the day-to-day operations, and then I think that I can more properly now be focused on the over-the-horizon type goals for the TRA, is where I think my headspace needs to be for the organization.
Well, we'll definitely want to talk about a few of those initiatives here in a little bit.
Yes.
But before we get into the future, I was going to ask if you could talk a little bit about some of the programs that are part of the TR Association. You talked about scholarship being a part of that. We had the public historian for the TRA, Dr. Michael Cullinane, here on a couple episodes talking about some of those things you just talked about with Remembering TR and TR's Ghost, a couple of his publications that both kind of speak to what is the legacy of Roosevelt into the 21st century. So could you talk a little bit about some of the programs that the TRA supports?
Sure. Yeah. And, I mentioned the site acquisition and the building of the library. Those were things when people still remembered Theodore Roosevelt, right? So that was essentially our first 50 years, was ensuring that the memory had foundational things in place that could be tools for ensuring that his legacy and his ideals were continued over the next 50 to 100 years. The second 50 years is when we started to focus on our membership as a nonprofit and what kind of programs are we doing to perpetuate TR's ideals and what are we doing for our members, right, to provide a benefit to being a member of the Theodore Roosevelt Association. And so as far as programs go, we've had tremendous success with our police awards, which are in various locations around the country. And we've also had them for a while in Washington, D.C., in Philadelphia, and they exist in Boston. We have a very successful program in Long Island that recognizes a law enforcement officer that has recovered from a significant injury which occurred in the administration of his or her duties as a law enforcement officer. We were just before the recording started, we were talking about Joe Wigan. Joe Wigan is leading our Teddy Bears for Kids effort, which is a tremendous program which brings a lot of joy both to those that participate in it and particularly for young kids and families in hospitals, particularly during the holidays when Joe leads the effort to ensure that teddy bears are distributed to kids that would like a teddy bear in the hospital to kind of brighten their day. And having gone through a fairly serious health situation with my own young son a couple of years ago, I can tell you that those kinds of small efforts really make a difference to kids and their families. When you're in an otherwise bleak situation in a, pretty drab hospital room, somebody coming in and chatting with you and giving you a teddy bear really goes a long way. So it sounds small, but it's not. And it has tremendous impact. We are partners with our warship named for Theodore Roosevelt, CVN 71, the nuclear aircraft carrier, which is now in San Diego. We have been involved with that ship since its christening, and it is nicknamed the Big Stick. Every year, the ship's captain deliberates with the other leaders aboard the ship and nominates and selects a junior officer of the year. It's a prestigious award for the ship's crew that the captain is recognizing this young officer for this individual's record of achievement in their role in the ship. And we do that every year. And typically, they come out to the annual meeting. The ship's captain does a video. It's really terrific. And we get a chance to support a young officer on board the ship. And on our board and in our trustees, we've got several former ship's captains that take a very active role in helping us administer the programs that we do with the ship. Another one that we do is Home for the Holidays, where we gift travel money to young enlisted sailors that otherwise wouldn't be able to get home during the holidays because they just don't have the cash for the ticket or are in need in some other manner. And so tremendous. So we support sailors on the ship in that way. Scholarship. I mentioned that, fundamentally, I think that the Theodore Roosevelt Association, our role is to encourage scholarship and education. Several years ago, we started a fellowship at Harvard. So it's $5,000 a year for a emerging scholar or writer that would like to use the Theodore Roosevelt collection at Houghton Library to allow them to come. It pays them a stipend and do a deep dive into the resources of the Roosevelt collection at Harvard. And so we do that every year now. And I think we may be in our third or fourth year. Past fellows include none other than Mike Cullinane, who has won it twice, and also Rachel Lane from the TR Presidential Library. Yeah. Those are just some examples of some of the many programs that we try and sustain.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit also about the book awards that are supported by the TR Association?
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I can't believe I forgot to bring it up because it's an award that I created. So I think we're now in our 7th iteration of the Theodore Roosevelt Association Book Prize. We've got a great committee that includes Stacy Cordery, among others. We are every year pulling all of the books that were printed the previous year for consideration for this prize. And we vet them, and it's any book that's been published that is predominantly about Theodore Roosevelt, right? And sometimes we get books submitted to us that maybe TR is part of the book or part of the subject, but if it's not about Theodore Roosevelt, then we normally take a pass on it. And you'd be surprised. I mean, he's a popular topic. I'm like, and we'll discuss it. I'm a Theodore Roosevelt book collector, and I've got over 1,000 books in my library, but people still keep writing books about Theodore Roosevelt. Oh, yeah. And some of them many of them are quite good and are covering ground that has not been covered before. Mike Cullinane's terrific book, The Ghost of Theodore Roosevelt. Terrific book, won our prize. Talked about Theodore Roosevelt's place in the American memory and in the American consciousness and the ebb and flow, the historiography of Theodore Roosevelt, right? Just a tremendous book. Darren Lundy's book on Theodore Roosevelt as a field naturalist was groundbreaking. I'm proud to tell you, and it has not been publicly announced yet, but it will be by the time this airs, is that Ed O'Keefe's fine book just won this year's Theodore Roosevelt Association Book Prize. So you guys get the first announcement of that outside of Ed and his publishing team.
Scoop.
It's a fantastic book, not because the history has not been covered before, but it's because Ed used a particular lens that had not been used before on Theodore Roosevelt, which in 2024 matters because you're now taking a look at the women that influenced a president throughout his entire life, and it was significant in so many ways that the three women that he details shaped Theodore Roosevelt's trajectory and his thoughts and his life. And it also made quite a few interesting discoveries along the way. So, a lot of the history has been covered, but when you apply a different lens to it, and that lens is scholarly and thoughtful, that type of work is still being done today. And we also have a children's book award that we award. And every year we evaluate books that are written for young kids, and it's a lot of fun. And very often we will present the award to both the author and the illustrator, which is a lot of fun too. So, when we do these presentations, it's always interesting to hear the perspective of these people as they charted out their Theodore Roosevelt course on this work, whether it's a children's book or a book for adults, because it never ceases to amaze me. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt has been one of the most important parts of my life since that fourth grade book report, right?
Yeah.
And it never ceases to amaze me what I still learn, what I still see that I've never seen before, and what draws a vast, vast array of different people to Theodore Roosevelt. It's just, he really, one of my favorite quotes about Theodore Roosevelt was from his good friend William Hard, who said that TR was the prism through which the light of day took on more colors than could be seen in anybody else's company. Right? So think about that. The prism through which the light of day took on more colors than could be seen in anybody else's company. And to me, that's just brilliant. And it just summarizes TR. And it also, I think, characterizes the appeal of Theodore Roosevelt for everybody, regardless of where you come from, your ethnicity, your cultural background. I mean, you can find some touch point with Theodore Roosevelt that is appealing, and not only appealing, but draws you in.
Yeah.
Theodore Roosevelt had that power living, and he has that power now 100 years after his death. Yeah. So even though I said the history's been covered, I will tell you that the definitive history of Theodore Roosevelt's presidency has not been written, which is unfortunate because it's arguably the least interesting part of his life. It is the most important part of his life. And I think that for most biographers, they'll admit that they're exhausted by 1901 and they know what's coming after 1909. So they kind of catch their breath between 1901 and 1909 and they kind of just kind of get their way through the presidency, right? Because that alone is worthy of its own study. And so I think that the bookends on either side of the presidency are where much of the interest is typically covered, both in popular history and in scholarly history. And we still do not have, Theodore Rex was good. Lewis Gould did a study on TR's presidency, but there is yet to be the definitive history of Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. And like I said, you could say that it's the least interesting part of his life, but it is certainly the most important, and it's not there yet. So,
yeah. All right, there's your challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's terrific. Larry and I hope eventually to get as many of the annual TRA Book Prize award-winning authors. We would love to work our way through that list too, and have them come on and talk a little bit more in detail about their findings. And but that's the great thing. You look through that list of book prize winners, and there's such a tremendous wealth. You could just see the depth of Roosevelt's life through the topics covered there.
Oh, yeah. And, so the other thing I'll tell you, when it comes to what does the Theodore Roosevelt Association do, I see us, and this is sort of a military term, so you'll be familiar with this, but a lot of listeners may not be. But, I see the TRA as the center of gravity, right? I mentioned for Roosevelt study, for Roosevelt education, for Roosevelt scholarship, and also to be, like I said, that big umbrella for all other Roosevelt organizations. I see us as a center of gravity because we have got our footprint on so much in the scholarly world, from the book prize to the scholarship at Harvard. We have a very deep connection with Harvard and their collection. I talk with Ed O'Keefe almost on a weekly basis via email or phone regarding various things with the TRPL. And I talk, one of our strategic pillars is partnerships. And a nonprofit can't survive in 2024 without developing partnerships, because particularly, like I said, in a niche organization like the TRA, where it's Theodore Roosevelt, right? Theodore Roosevelt is not a source of universal passion, so we have a limited demographic, and we shouldn't all be competing for the same demographic, right? So, that's the reality of it. And so I think that the better we are at developing those partnerships, which I see the TRA playing if not the major, certainly an essential role in that, I think the better off all of these organizations will be as far as, ensuring that the memory of that great man serves as an example for future generations, which is fundamentally what this is all about.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Ed O'Keefe, and while we're talking about partnerships here, could you describe what does some of that partnership look like with the TR Presidential Library being constructed out in Medora, North Dakota?
So that's an interesting question, and I think Ed and I are just at the very beginning, with others, of shaping what that relationship will become. Because the Presidential Library is a tremendous initiative. They're underway, and this is going to happen. It's going to be a destination. I see it as another entity that will add value, again, to perpetuating the legacy and ideals. And it's long overdue, and it's well-deserved. And, there are things, and I'm just, this is back of the bar napkin type thoughts now, but, there are potential for joint programs, forums for discussing modern day events at the library, right? This is very basic, but, where are we with conservation? What's the Roosevelt family legacy? What's the role of the Navy in the 21st century, right? That type of thing. So, the Presidential Library is a destination. It's a potential platform for any number of different things with partners and events. And we're going to do our annual meeting in October of 2026 there, right after they open in July of 2026. So we're just in the beginning stages of what this is going to look like. And of course, Ed and his team are very busy building the library. So, they're knee deep in that right now. But I think when the time is right, that I think you'll see a very agile and sophisticated relationship between both the TRA and the TRPL that also harnesses the power that a lot of these other entities bring to the table too. So I think it adds yet another piece to that center of gravity, or that umbrella, or that heat map, that's going to be transformational.
Yeah. There'll certainly be people who visit the TR Presidential Library who may not even know that an organization called the TR Association exists. So wonderful opportunity to kind of cross-pollinate there.
Yeah, that too brings up something that I wanted to mention. I'm not beyond plugging the Theodore Roosevelt Association, www.theodoroosevelt.org. Become a member. If you're interested in Theodore Roosevelt, you should belong to the Theodore Roosevelt Association because one, we are the congressionally chartered organization, and two, fundamentally, our role is encouraging scholarship and education. And three, it is unique in that our footprint is global, and you will have the opportunity to network and connect with all of those Theodore Roosevelt entities that we have relationships with. And within our membership and within that partnership spectrum that we have, you'll meet everybody in the TR community because eventually they're all connected with the TRA in some manner. I mean, I can't tell you since I was 12 years old, and I didn't go to my first annual meeting largely because I couldn't afford to. And I was busy growing up and going to college. And, I think I was a captain in the Marine Corps when I went to my first one, which was in Norfolk, which was aboard the USSTR. And the people that you will meet are Roosevelts and admirals and people just like you, right? Professors and authors, and you'll attend events at our partner campuses. John Gable invited me as his guest to the 200th anniversary of the White House dinner, which was a great honor. John was the speaker at the symposium about Theodore Roosevelt, and I was his guest. And Doug Brinkley was at our table at dinner, and there was a reception at the White House, which was just phenomenal. I was honored to be present at Theodore Roosevelt's Medal of Honor ceremony when he was presented with the Medal of Honor. Now, there was a separate, smaller event at the White House with the president and the family, but I was at the event, which was basically also by invite only, but it was at Heroes Hall in the Pentagon where the Medal of Honor was formally bestowed on TR. And I held the Medal of Honor. So these are the things. If a young farm kid from Pennsylvania can be involved and engaged and meet all of these people that I never thought I would have the chance to. But by the fortune of discovering the Theodore Roosevelt Association, that's what it means. And you get a chance to participate in dialogue and discussions just like we're having today with the three of us on why does Theodore Roosevelt matter today in 2024? Who cares, right? But here's what I will tell you. Look at the headlines today, right? Great power competition, police reform, civil service, the role of the Navy, the Panama Canal, fertility rates, the role of political parties, the role of the judiciary. All of these things were topics that were at the forefront of Theodore Roosevelt's time, and that Theodore Roosevelt mentally dealt with himself intellectually, from his political viewpoints and his actions as an executive, et cetera, as a campaigner, as a politician. And so it matters. And history teaches us how to act or how not to act, as the case may be, right? And I think that we can learn a lot if we do a serious study into what happened before us, right? One of the librarians of Congress, I think Borstein was his name, had a great quote, and I may not get it right, but something like trying to understand today without an understanding of history is like pulling dead flowers up without the root, or something like that. It's a great quote. David McCulloch used it all the time, who's one of my favorite people. And I had the opportunity to meet also as a member of the TRA. So that's why the TRA matters. And more importantly, the TRA matters today because Theodore Roosevelt matters today.
You've mentioned all that the TRA does and stands for today. What do you think some of the challenges are that the TRA is facing in its second century?
So I've thought a lot about that, particularly now that we have a strategic plan, right? So just so you know, our strategic plan has pillars. I mentioned one of them, partnerships. The other pillars are legacy, the Roosevelt family, programs and our membership. So our challenge now in implementing the strategic plan to make us vital and valuable to the next century is I think that we need to work on our forward-facing presence, right? So much has occurred in the last 10 years with technology and the way people absorb information, the speed and the method information is given or fed to people. And we need to look at how we're doing that as an organization. We publish our Theodore Roosevelt Association Journal, which is highly regarded. It is the TRA's creation, and it has contributed to the scholarship of Theodore Roosevelt in immense ways. Dr. Bill Tilchin, our editor and former chair and current vice president, he's terrific, and he does great work with the journal. And we're going to continue doing the journal. It was just digitized and can be found all 50 years worth, with the exception of the embargo that we placed for members in current issues. But all of them can be found on the Theodore Roosevelt Center's website at Dickinson State University. So we just completed that project, which was huge because otherwise, before this, there was no way, unless you happen to have copies of the TRA journal going back to 1974, they were lost.
Yeah.
And so, so the journal is one thing, but I think that we need to get better and improve our forward-facing presence in social media and the way we communicate in general. And our executive director that we hire is going to be tasked with taking a look at that. Another challenge, I think, is that in order for a nonprofit to succeed in 2024, a membership-based model is not viable. Again, for a niche organization that focuses on Theodore Roosevelt, we need to rethink what a member is. Do we need 6 or 7 different tiers of membership? What are the benefits of being a member? Are there ways that we can improve that? But let's not be solely focused on our members for revenue generation, right? So we can sustain ourselves. Let's look broader at how we can do this better. Because in 1985, a membership-based organization was viable. But the reality is that the TRA is not Greenpeace. We're never going to have 3 million members. So in 2024, with our membership now, somewhere between 900 to 1,000 members, I think that it's a fundamental shift in the way a lot of nonprofits are looking at how they can sustain themselves. And it's a way that the TRA's got to look at re-examining itself and what it means to be a member of the Theodore Roosevelt Association and what we provide. So that is another challenge. I think we need to broaden our lens a little bit and think about, how do we sustain ourselves in a generation where people don't join, right? It's a generation, kids are not joiners necessarily. They're not going to write a $25 check or a $100 check a year to get the TRA journal necessarily, right? Mm-hmm. It's just not how people consume information in a lot of ways, right? There are people like us, I will, right? And lots of people will. And the TRA journal is a terrific flagship touchstone element to the TRA. But I think that in today's generation that we need to look at how are we getting the message across outside of just the printed medium, and how are we evolving beyond membership, because this is a generation now of people that don't join. So I think that's one of the things that we need to kind of strategically grapple with intellectually over the coming years. The other thing is we need to look at bolstering what we are doing for scholarship and to encourage dialogue about Theodore Roosevelt. I think that fundamentally everything the TRA does should come back around to what is this doing in regard to enhancing the dialogue about Theodore Roosevelt, right? Us, because that fundamentally is our role. Anything else we do, with some exception, is sort of white noise, and maybe we shouldn't be focusing on it. So I'm a big person for strategic discipline. The executive committee has heard this. Our current CEO, Howard Ehrlich, has heard this. It's my own background as a strategic planner and as a Marine Corps officer. I think you've got to set the strategic goals and you've got to maintain discipline. You can always pivot from them, but you've got to have an understood baseline so that when you are pivoting, you know what you're pivoting from. And so I think that, uh, Admiral Architzel, David Architzel, the chair before me, spent a lot of time and energy with his team. I was one of his vice presidents developing the strategic plan. And now it's on my shoulders to ensure that it's executed and implemented. And we're going to do it. I've got a laser-like focus on it, and I think that it is what's going to sustain us and also make the organization more viable over the next century. So we've got challenges, but they are not unique. A lot of small nonprofits struggle with this today. What are we going to look like in the fast-changing environment of public discourse? And museums are really struggling with it. How do we draw in visitors? How do we engage kids that want to touch things like they're used to screens? How do we make it more interactive in ways that maybe has not traditionally been done in an art museum, right? How do you get that visitor to be engaged? And we're thinking through things like this for the Theodore Roosevelt Association too.
Yeah, I think obviously that's a big part of what the TR Presidential Library has been thinking through as well is reaching out to 21st century families and how to make museums more interesting for younger people. So speaking of younger people, you were once a young guy interested in TR, and you have you've alluded to this so far, but we kind of been holding out this question. Can you recall what it is that first sparked your interest in Roosevelt and what that journey looked like for you?
So I was very fortunate to have two parents that encouraged the interest. In fact, the fourth grade book report was a byproduct of an offhand comment from my father when I came home and was like, well, I don't know what to do a book report on. And he said, how about Theodore Roosevelt? And apparently my grandfather, who died before I remember knowing him, was a big TR fan. And I think that was what was in my dad's head. And he just said Theodore Roosevelt. And little did he know that here we are today, right? I mean, it took on a life of its own and snowballed, so to speak. And like I said, I was very lucky that I had two parents that fostered and encouraged that interest, and then mentors along the way throughout my entire life to include today. And for me, I said earlier, TR sunk his fangs into me, and he really did. And I think it was because for a young boy, Theodore Roosevelt did everything that you could possibly imagine and then some. What he packed into his life was just extraordinary. And, we talked about the exhaustion that biographers have when they get to 1901 and then they know what's coming after 1909, right? I mean, for all of those reasons, that's what appealed to me as a young boy. And today, the notion of a hero is sort of cliche, or it's an anachronism, right? People don't like to say, well, they're my hero, because we're knocking heroes down off their pedestals, sometimes justifiably so, and sometimes not. And so, it sounds sort of old-timey if you say Theodore Roosevelt is my hero, but, he is and was. I am no apologist for Theodore Roosevelt. He had his faults. He was impulsive. He made misjudgments and errors, but I think in the long view of history, Theodore Roosevelt's still looking pretty good.
Yeah.
Right? Compared to, like I said, some of other historical heroes that justifiably have been re-examined. Nobody has escaped the public's or the academics' eye, and nor should they, because I think we constantly have to re-examine them. And I think that's healthy and it's important. And I think when we put these individuals up on a pedestal, we're doing a disservice to them, and we're doing an injustice to what we could be learning from them. Faults, black eyes, misjudgments, all of that is part of what shaped the individual. And I think that if we're going to be honest to ourselves and honest to the interpretation and honest to the dialogue, and provide insights that will help us today, then I think we take all of these people off of pedestals, right? the Theodore Roosevelt Association is, I don't see it as a fan club, right? Like in a real sense. Like
Yeah.
everybody loves
Hmm.
Theodore Roosevelt, right? I'm one of his
Yeah.
biggest fans. But I don't want us to be a fan club, if that makes
Wow.
sense. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
That that makes sense. I think from the very beginning, the TRA, there were people who made that claim. It was just all hero worship, and certainly the founder, Herman Hagedorn, he made no qualms that he deeply admired Roosevelt.
Yeah.
So I think it was in one of Michael Cullinane's books, where it was Remembering TR or TR's Ghost, where he talked about a young John Gable writing to Herman Hagedorn, and then they eventually met, which is exactly what you just described about you
Yes.
writing to John Gable, who was the director of the TRA. So, how do you see yourself, in this line? You're literally two generations removed from Roosevelt in
Yeah.
that line of separation.
Yeah, well, it's pretty extraordinary when I think about it because I don't consider myself to be a particularly special person, but I had a very special interest that was nurtured and encouraged, and it's just my personality. It is astounding to me when I think back. If you look at the list of chairmen of the Theodore Roosevelt Association, I mean, it's people of significance. James Garfield Jr., just right before me, was Vice Admiral Architzel. And, like I said, here's this 12-year-old kid from rural Pennsylvania. But, I bring to the table a lot of energy and a lot of passion for the subject and a lifetime of devotion to learning about Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah, I mean, I've been around a long time in this TR game, right? 1984. When you
Wow.
start doing the math, that's a lot. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, there's
Yeah.
very few people that I've not had the opportunity and the privilege of meeting or encountering or am in dialogue. Wallace Daly, for example.
Yeah.
We still communicate. We exchange Christmas cards, and Wallace, he's retiring this year from the Massachusetts State Archives. He was the longtime curator, part-time curator of the Theodore Roosevelt collection at Harvard.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm very fortunate. And so the other thing is that the weight of that history I do think about. Like I'm not screwing this up, right? I can't. And so I rely on our other leaders in the organization. We're fortunate. We've got a great bench and we're building our bench every day.
Yeah.
um, that we've got 100-year-old organization that's got to last for another 100 years.
Well, our next topic is something that all three of us are passionate about: collecting Theodore Roosevelt. And I was curious, was there anything that really spurred your initial interest? Like things you learned about TR in the book report or something you collected?
So that's a very good question. And I loved your session with Tom Peeling. Tom's been a friend of mine for many, many years. I know Tom Peeling very well. Um, all of us are like moths drawn to the Theodore Roosevelt
Yes.
flame in some manner, right? And again, the William Hart quote, he was the prism through which the light of day took on more colors.
Yeah.
So for me, it was books.
Mm.
It was the book. To answer your question most directly, I've always been a book lover. Some of my fondest memories of a young boy is my mom taking my sister and I to our community public library and checking out stacks of books and going back the next
Hmm.
week and getting more stacks of books. And this was something that you could just keep doing, right? And we had a gorgeous, it was a Carnegie style public library in my hometown of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The Bosler Free Public Library still is there today. Um, and I just, very early on, I had a love of books. And to this day, I'm a compulsive reader. I consume everything. Books. I love fiction, literary fiction, and not just history and biography, but just about everything. And I always am reading something or several things. And I became a collector of books about Theodore Roosevelt and books that Theodore Roosevelt wrote. So that was also a collection that a young boy could begin and build with limited financial discretionary funds, let's just say,
Yeah.
right? Um, Now, there's that also is a spectrum. I'm at the point now where I have taken loans out for books that I needed for my collection, but that's a whole other story. But and I'm not joking, but that is all to say that books were the spark of the collecting. But I've also sort of spun off and have collected other things. I like vintage photography of TR. I have, 10 or 11 really great signed Theodore Roosevelt photographs. I like things from the 1912 campaign.
Yes.
I like, because the 1912 campaign just fascinates me
Yeah.
for any number of reasons. Also, I like sheet music dealing with Theodore Roosevelt. And I'm not musically inclined and I can't read music, but my music collection has been scanned and it too can be accessed on the Theodore Roosevelt Center's website at Dickinson State University. And when you flip through there and you can see all the images, it's just fun. The breadth and depth of music, sheet music that was created
Yeah.
about Theodore Roosevelt, because that was popular entertainment then. It was the Spotify of the day, right? In a very real sense, people sat around the piano and they played these songs, or they
Yeah.
played these songs at public gatherings or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think now I'm looking over my shoulder because they're there. But I must have 250 to 300 different pieces of sheet music, and they keep still showing up.
Oh yeah. There's always that new one that you find like you didn't know existed. That
Yeah,
yeah.
it's remarkable, and it's
That's
so much fun, and so many of them are graphic with bold colors and
oh
fun. Some of them are offensive because of the mores
oh
of the
yeah.
day, right? It's a lot of fun. So the other thing I'll tell you too is that there's a certain amount of psychosis involved with collecting. There was a famous book collector. I forget his name at the moment, but he wrote a book about his book collecting enthusiasm, and he called it A Gentle Madness. And I think
Yep.
that's a perfect way of summarizing anybody that's got the collecting bug. It really is a gentle madness. Like I said, it's a psychosis, and you either are a collector or you're not. And some people have the bug, or they just don't, right? But I definitely have that bug. And with Theodore Roosevelt, like with any collection, I think that you've got to have a pretty tight focus, or it can really get out of hand very quickly, right? I try and keep mine, like I said, to the books, Theodore Roosevelt's
Yeah.
writings. My book collection is the heart and soul of my collection. I've got books signed by him. I've got all the limited signed editions. I've got his Harvard textbook. I've got several books that he inscribed to his children. I have manuscript copies of some of his books, or pages from the
Wow.
manuscripts of those books. So that's really where I focus. But then I've got smaller collections that are fun, like I said, the sheet music and signed photography and that sort of thing. But yeah, otherwise, your session with Tom Peeling, if anybody's interested, go back and listen to that, because that'll tell you Tom's got an amazing collection. Um, and TR is fun to collect, right? I know TR collectors that have never read a biography about Theodore Roosevelt, and they really don't even care about Theodore Roosevelt the person, but the stuff is fun, right? The graphic celluloid campaign pins,
Yes.
the sheet music. Some people are price tag collectors. There's value in Theodore Roosevelt material, so that they
Yeah.
don't care too much about Theodore Roosevelt. It's just fun, and that's okay, right? I try and make an effort to ensure things are framed properly, and I've got decent, nice antique bookcases with glass doors, and stuff is out of sunlight. I'm fortunate that I live with just myself and my two dogs and my son when he's with me, so I make the decisions on what's displayed and hung. I'm not confined to any space, right? So I try and do it tastefully and make sure that it's not all Theodore Roosevelt. But I've got a good friend of mine who's a Lincoln collector, and the Lincoln collecting world is a very expensive world, and this
Yes.
person collects at the very high end of that market, and Lincoln flags and campaign flags and that sort of thing. And they're 30, 40, 50K and going north of that. And he was told they can't be on the walls. You got to keep them under the bed.
Mhm.
So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow. Collecting is a gentle madness. Yeah.
My wife might get rid of the gentle part and just think it's a madness, but
Yeah. Yeah.
where, where do you go to
Some of my
commit
best
people?
friends,
Like,
my best friends in my entire life, we talk about people we've met, which it really goes a long way towards developing a young person early on.
wow.
Some of the best friends in my life have been the collectors. Peter Scanlon from Albany, New
Oh
York,
yeah.
who died in 2012. He was a great role model and mentor and fun. We went to shows together for many, many years, and I went
Wow.
to his house in Albany, and we traded things back and forth. And despite the age difference, Theodore Roosevelt was a common bond and a common passion. So the age difference, which grew less over time, it didn't matter. I think I went to his first time to his home in Albany, New York, and saw his collection, and I was just blown away. And I might have been 13 years old, and he was in my wedding. John Gable was in my wedding. Um, Gary Clinton is another individual who has a terrific TR collection, and he has been a dear friend of mine for decades. So you make these connections, and those are the things that really matter. And I think that that's one of those things going back to the TRA. That's what the TRA can do for people that are interested in Theodore Roosevelt. It,
Yeah.
it provides you events at which you can develop friends and connections and camaraderie with people that have
Yeah.
similar interests. Yeah.
which is what's missing, I think, in our culture today is joining, joining in clubs and that sort of thing, and that interpersonal communication, and that's it's a real value, I think, of any organization, but of TRA in particular. And well, Greg, you mentioned 1,000 plus TR books. And you've been doing this since you were a kid, pre-internet. So at the annual meeting in Indianapolis back in October, you were a part of a panel discussion about private collecting and institutional collecting. And I remember I think it was you that made a comment that the internet has ruined the fun of collecting. And can you talk a little bit more about what you meant by that?
So back when I started collecting, 13, 14 years old, it was definitely pre-internet, late 80s. And you built a collection by traveling, writing letters, going to shows, Americana shows, going to the great old antiquarian bookshops, which sadly fewer and fewer exist anymore, with the creaky wooden floors and the cat laying in the corner and the very distinctive smell of old
Yes.
books when you entered, and the cantankerous bookseller who said,
Oh yeah.
I'd go up to him and, do you have anything on Theodore Roosevelt? And he said, well, you got to look around. And, because he had no idea what he had. But that was the fun of it. And you just start digging. You would turn stuff up. So the internet changed the game dramatically. Because now you could sit at home on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and scroll eBay or Live Auctioneer or any of the number of auction sites
Yeah.
which now have an internet presence, and you're going to find stuff. And you can build a collection that way. And if you've got enough money, you can build a collection in a very great collection that way. But in my mind, the thrill of the hunt, you're losing something when a couple of keystrokes can get you what you need. Right now, I'm
Yes.
as guilty as everybody else, right? I mean, I've got sophisticated search things going on, and I know where to look for things, but I still have, some of these dealers and friends of mine, they come across things, or they're in a shop and they call me and they're like, hey, I'm here standing here right now. Tell me if you want
Yeah.
this, right? Yeah. Um,
Yep.
and those types of things are few and far between anymore, but they're still out there. But the internet really killed sort of the fun, and then you would build a network of people that knew that you collected this stuff, and if they turned something up or if they came across things themselves at the old Brimfield antique, the
Yes.
sprawling acres, they do it twice a year in Brimfield, Massachusetts. And I mean, it was like the haven. Twice a year you'd go up there and you'd spend days prowling through dealers booths and stuff, and people would hold things for you, and it was just a lot of fun, and that experience just isn't there, I don't think, for modern collectors. It's a different thrill, it's a different way of hunting, but again, I'm a book lover. Man, I miss those antiquarian bookshops.
Yes.
And I think if you're of a certain age, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I
Mhm.
kind of set the scene for you with the creaky floorboards and the cat and a grumpy bookseller and stacks of books all over the place and maybe a room where he or she would keep paper stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a lot of fun. And I was also very fortunate that a lot of dealers and some of the more well-known dealers in political Americana and the Americana field were very generous with their insight and allowing me to pay over time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even as a young officer in the Marine Corps, I wasn't making the kind of money I needed necessarily to build the collection that I've got now. But I was very fortunate that, if I had something
Yeah.
in mind that a dealer had, they'd be like, look, take it home with you, send me $100 a month
Yeah.
and for a year, and it'll be paid off, you know. That you don't do that anymore with the internet.
Right.
Right? You've got to figure out a way to pay for it, PayPal or Venmo or, PayPal credit or whatever. I mean, so you don't get the ability to kind of like negotiate necessarily with a seller or say, hey, look, I can't swing this right now, but can we work something out?
Yeah.
And so those are the memories and the experiences and also the education that comes with talking to these dealers face to face. Like saying, don't buy that because the condition is not right, and here's why, right? Um, wait for it to come around again, or buy that now, even if the condition isn't great, because good luck trying to find another one,
Hmm.
right? So it's that kind of advice that you don't get if you're sitting alone behind a computer,
No.
just finding stuff on your own. Yeah.
No, we've been fortunate, my wife and I, with flea markets in Ohio and Michigan, to be able to have some of that, the friends, and even like the American Political Items Collectors Association. That is a great group to be able to find people like Tom Peeling and others that you can work with and they can advise you on things. And yeah, I've increased the collection quite a bit thanks to Tom. And we're fortunate with the Lansing, Michigan area. East Lansing has two of the old bookstores still there. You walk in, it's exactly what you described. It's just the thrill of the search. And even Julia got into it at one of our last shows we went to. A gentleman brought a picture of Theodore Roosevelt over from 1918 with him wearing the 5-star pin for the four boys and for Dr. Derby. And she was fascinated by it. And she was like, I want to get that one, so the collecting bug is spreading, but
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, the American Political Items Collectors, a plug for them because
oh,
I've been a member of them about as long, 1988,
yeah,
1989. Tremendous network of people that are just as concerned with the history as they are
yes,
with the collecting of the material culture of, our
very
political
much.
process and campaigns.
Yeah.
So, not necessarily, Greg, the most expensive items, but what are some of the most meaningful items in your
Mm,
collection? Meaningful to you?
So at the top of mind, yeah, sometimes it's not the most expensive, right?
mhm,
Sometimes the most expensive is perhaps important, but it's not the one that you love the most. So in my case, while it certainly has value, one of my favorite things in my collection is I have a studio photograph done by the famous Western American photographer Edward Curtis of
Oh, wow.
Theodore Roosevelt. So
yeah,
it's a famous image of TR that Curtis, who did the series of books, The North American Indian, and captured for years. It was a major project, and Theodore Roosevelt wrote the introduction to it. Native Americans, various tribes, and documenting them. And he was a master photographer. I mean, one of America's great photographers. And he did a series of studio portraits of TR and his family, all of the kids.
yeah,
And I have an oversized platinum print studio photograph
mm,
of TR by Curtis, signed and inscribed by TR and signed by Curtis. It is
Wow.
gorgeous. And it is also my favorite photograph of Theodore Roosevelt. It's very spectral. I wrote an article in the TRA Journal about this image. It's very somber. It's a very serious image. And if you Google Theodore Roosevelt, Edward Curtis, it'll come up. But it's my favorite photographic portrait of TR. And so a great backstory to how I got this. is that I saw it advertised. This is an advantage of the internet. I found it online. I was stationed in North Carolina, and it was in an auction in Bethesda, Maryland. So I think it was a 6-hour drive, probably. And it was like an estate sale. And I think there was a signed photograph of William Howard Taft in the sale, too. But it was it. It was Taft and Roosevelt, and everything else was unrelated. So I thought this may slip through the cracks. The auction house did not describe it properly. The image was not good. It looked like it had some condition issues. They didn't identify it as the Curtis photograph. They just said signed photo of Theodore Roosevelt, right? So I said, I'm going to be there on the auction floor. And so I drove from Greensboro, North Carolina to Bethesda, Maryland. I was there for the auction, and I got it for, I think, $1,200 in the sale.
Oh.
And I drove away with it.
Wow.
And before I left the auction house parking lot, I unframed it because there was clearly some issue going on. And I was hoping that it wasn't on the photograph, but rather on the glass. And sure enough, it was on the glass and the photograph is pristine. Yeah, if anything, that grime on the glass kept the photograph from fading over time. It probably was in a smoker's home or something, and the photograph is just pristine. So I was elated when I got home 7 hours later. And so that's one of my favorite things. And in the Curtis photography world, it's a very desirable photograph, let alone signed by both of them. So there's that. And I also have Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural address, which was printed in a small number government printing office, but very elaborate-ish for a government printing job, bound, but it is signed by TR in March of 1905. So he signed it the month and year of the inaugural, and it's his inauguration address. And I've never seen it unsigned. I think I may have seen 2 other copies of it signed in 30 or 40 years. So I love that because it's his inaugural address, right? I collect TR's writings, and if you collect TR's writings, his presidential inaugural address has got to be up there as far as one of the more important things.
Certainly.
Definitely.
And you've got great stories to go along with it, which adds to the value, right? That's
yeah.
It does. So, if our listeners are interested in joining the Theodore Roosevelt Association, where can they go online? We can give one more pitch for the TRA to find more information.
Sure. It's www.theodoroosevelt.org. So I'm proud to say that we own the Theodore Roosevelt domain name. And you can also Google Theodore Roosevelt Association and it'll come up. Like I said, if you are even remotely interested in Theodore Roosevelt, then this is an organization. Our membership rates are affordable and it's tiered. If you're remotely interested in Theodore Roosevelt, this is the organization to belong to.
The annual meeting coming up this October at Hyde Park, right?
Yes. So it's going to be a great event. It's the Hudson River Valley in the fall. So it's a destination. It's gorgeous up there this time of year. October of 2025, we're partnering with Hyde Park and the FDR Presidential Library. And the theme is going to be the Roosevelt family legacy. And so we're going to be looking at both the Oyster Bay Roosevelts and the Hyde Park Roosevelts. And we'll have Roosevelts there, and we'll have panels, and it'll be a mix of symposia and events and a dinner as well, our traditional black tie Saturday evening dinner. So it'll be a great event. I'm really excited because we get to broaden the lens, right? And we get to deepen our partnership with the FDR side of the house, which, like I said, our partnerships are everything now. And this is a really great opportunity to build a connection with Hyde Park and the FDR Presidential Library and that side of the Roosevelt dimension. Yeah.
I've not been there, so I'm really looking forward to it this fall, this October.
And, bring your family because the Hudson River Valley, there's all sorts of things going on that weekend, as it turns out also. So it's sort of, it can be if the family doesn't really care to spend 6 hours in Theodore Roosevelt events, they can do the sheep shearing festival or whatever it is going on across the street. There's a lot going on that weekend. And like I said, it's the Hudson River Valley in October. So it'll be gorgeous.
Oh,
yeah.
Lovely.
Well, Greg, I think, we've sure appreciated all your time here. Very
Yes.
generous today, and I know our listeners are going to love hearing you talk about your collections, hearing about the Roosevelt Association. So, thank you so much for being a part of the Talk About Teddy podcast.
Yes. Thank
Well, I'm
you.
glad to be here and keep doing the great work that you guys are doing. There's a lot of value added by these sessions. I love, like I said, Theodore Roosevelt has been a part of my life for decades, and every time I listen to, I think I've got almost all of them listened to. I'm learning something new, and they're some of my favorite people.
Well, we agree with that, and we're honored
Yes.
to hear you say that too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Happy New Year.
You too, Greg.
Happy New Year to you.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for listening.
You can find this podcast on our website, talkaboutteddy.com, where you can see show notes and transcripts, links to resources, and additional TR content. And please tell us what you think.
If you've enjoyed our content, please consider subscribing and reviewing the podcast wherever you listen, and tell your friends and family about us, because it really does make a tremendous difference and it helps others find this show.
We hope you'll join us for the next episode of Talk About Teddy. And until then, as our friend Colonel Roosevelt would say,
do what you can with what you have where you are.
bullet.